Lamar Jackson has been the hottest topic in football over the last couple of weeks. And a new article has added more intensity to this situation for a couple of interesting reasons.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Ravens. Welcome into the show. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much for being here on this midweek Wednesday edition of the show, a New Year's Eve edition of the show here on Locked On Ravens, and making Locked On Ravens a part of your day. Thanks so much to all the everydayers, the first-time listeners. If you're somewhere in the middle, thank you as well. We have 5 days a week plus more of daily Ravens content and coverage, and we have a jam-packed episode today. As we all know, Lamar Jackson's been one of the hottest topics. In fact, he has been the hottest topic of conversation in the NFL recently, and a new article dropped where there were opinions from agents, executives, and talking about the situation for Lamar, not necessarily from an injury perspective, but what it could mean for Lamar's future if certain things happen. So we'll dive into that. Then in the second part of the show, John Harbaugh shut down some drama with Tyler Huntley and Lamar Jackson in terms of what people have been saying about maybe Huntley starting over Lamar. We'll talk about what he had to say about that. Then finally, we'll get into some Ravens and Steelers updates, Lamar Jackson, TJ Watt in that winner go home scenario. Today's edition of Locked On Ravens and today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. All right, Mike Sando over at The Athletic. We've had Mike on a handful of times now. He is awesome, and Mike's incredible. He always does his homework and, is able to interview a lot of different people from within the NFL and within the industry. And so he put out an article. This article was on Monday night to be exact. And the title of it says, "The Ravens season is riding on week 18. Lamar Jackson's future could be too." And so he was talking about all the scenarios for the Ravens that have happened this season, obviously the situation for Baltimore and Pittsburgh in week 18, but he talked to an executive and an agent and kind of outlined, hey, last time after the lengthy contract negotiation back in 2023, it was a 5-year, $260 million extension. And he talked about the fact that Lamar doesn't have an agent, said that it was a struggle and good agents do more than negotiate. And it's interesting because an NFL executive in this article who Mike, looked at and talked to here said, quote, "The fact that Lamar does not have an agent is a really big negative," an NFL team exec said. "Who is talking to Lamar? Who is having the honest conversations? Where is he getting advice in terms of how to deal with these injury things? There needs to be a buffer for that process to work." And then Mike goes on in the article and says, "Agents sometimes clash with teams, which is better than players clashing with teams or distance growing between parties," which I think is a good point. But then the executive apparently continued and said, quote, "A quarterback has all kinds of ongoing issues that other positions do not face," the exec added. "The top agents have experience with those things. That advice is important, even to the point of sometimes agreeing with the team and letting the player know, no, you can't do it this way. With Lamar, he may feel he knows best." Now, I want everybody to walk through this process with me right now, because I think it's important that we have this conversation about these two blurbs. Again, I think that Mike's point was actually a solid one and a fair one about, there is no buffer between that. And that's kind of what the executive said with the buffer, where it's essentially Eric DeCosta in this situation, Eric DeCosta talking to Lamar Jackson and saying, "Hey, we really like you and we really want to, continue this partnership. But and if Lamar brings them a number, Eric DeCosta, if he comes back to that table and says, yeah, okay, like we want to keep you in Baltimore, we're willing to pay you, but here's why we don't want to pay you that much." And then maybe he'll talk about injuries, which again would be crazy, but maybe it'll be injuries. Maybe it'll be playoffs, or I don't know what conversations they're having there, but usually that's the agent. So I do understand that point. But I also don't think it's like this do or die thing with Lamar Jackson with an agent. And he did negotiate that on his own. And yes, it was a tedious process. It was a stressful process for, I'm sure everybody involved, but Lamar was able to get the job done. But back to my other point, walking through this together. This is an NFL team executive that is saying this to Mike. And his quote, the second part of it, where he said, even to the point of the agent sometimes agreeing with the team, letting players know, no, you can't do it this way with Lamar. He feels he knows best. Well, that's interesting. I actually have never heard that point of view before. And I think it's interesting, that point of view about, hey, agents agreeing with the team and no, you can't do it this way, is coming from a team executive that feels very agenda-based and, feels like something is being pushed there where, yeah, the NFL, the team executive wants the team to be right. And him putting this quote out there on an article in The Athletic with Mike, who's a very widely respected reporter and columnist and journalist and has been doing this forever, he's putting that in the air that, hey, like sometimes there's this stuff, and I get it. Like sometimes the player asks for, I'm not talking about Lamar, but just like in general, a player asks for too much money or a player acts a certain way and, thinks they're entitled to this or that. And maybe an agent is there to say, hey, no, this is what you do. But I've never heard like this before in an article like this. And it's interesting that it's coming with Lamar Jackson. So I do understand the point that this executive is making. And again, I don't know where Lamar is getting the advice on how to deal with injury stuff. I mean, I'm sure he has a team of people that he works with. I don't like an agent could be another person he works with, but it's been clear Lamar doesn't want to go that route. And I'm not going to sit here and like bash on him for not having it because he was able to do it the first time. And actually, like with this $70 million cap hit, has to go back to the table and negotiate again. So it could be that, hey, Lamar might be pretty good at this negotiating thing. I don't know. So I think that was an interesting point from the executive. But then there was an agent who also talked about the situation with Lamar heading into the offseason. And a prominent agent said what people are apparently thinking, what more people are thinking, and said, quote, the biggest story of the offseason is going to be Lamar. That is going to be crazy. And Mike mentioned, John Harbaugh downplaying the Baltimore Sun report, suggesting the relationship between him and Lamar was strained. And, Mike mentioned the market being different for Lamar as well. But this is interesting here because then there's a point in the article where there's it's a bold subtitle says identifying a fallback. And the question that is posed here is, would you rather have Jackson or would you rather have, say, 3 first-round picks and Malik Willis? Because the article actually starts off with at least the part about Lamar Jackson. The first bullet point was Malik Willis looks great for the Packers again Saturday night. How would he look in Baltimore? So there's an agent that said, or the prominent agent said, get Malik for $15 million a year, trade Lamar, get your 3 ones and a player, and now you can justify it thinking we have a similar style quarterback who is not as good, but is younger with way fewer miles. And again, this just feels like the Lamar Justin Fields conversation all over again to me, where, again, like Malik has looked great for the Packers the last couple of weeks. I'm not going to deny that, but it's just such an unknown. And, first round picks, that's great. Salary cap relief, that's great. But you know what else is great? Having Lamar Jackson on your football team, having Lamar Jackson be the quarterback of your football team. And I think with Malik Willis, what you're essentially banking on in that full-time role, and who's to say he couldn't be a really good quarterback as a starter, but you're essentially saying, hey, Malik Willis, he could be anything. He could even be Lamar Jackson. But again, I think Lamar Jackson is one of one. So I definitely wouldn't go that far. So again, it's not me trying to like bash on Malik Willis. I actually think he can go somewhere and be a really good player. But Lamar just covers up so many things on this team. And I think that Malik is honestly probably between where Lamar and Tyler Huntley, both those guys are right now. I think he's probably in the middle of those two guys where, Tyler Huntley is one of the better backups in the league. Lamar Jackson, one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL in the game today and that we've ever seen. I think Malik Willis probably, if he would get a full opportunity, would be an above average starter. And again, then you have to have the conversations. Oh, well, would you rather have an above average starter and you can build out this roster with pass rush and defense and offensive line and whatnot? And Malik Willis. The point to me is to build the roster out around Lamar Jackson, maneuver the cap, get the cap hit down, and just make the right moves to do that. Because again, like, where are these conversations about like actively trading Joe Burrow away or Josh Allen away or, Mahomes before he was injured away? You don't see any of those conversations, like you hear rumors about, does Joe Burrow want out of Baltimore? But it's not actively like, hey, let's trade away the injury prone Joe Burrow. Like you don't hear those conversations. Then there was also the comparison the agent had about Lamar to potentially being traded. He compared it to the Luka Doncic trade that the Mavericks and the Lakers made. For those who follow the NBA, for those that don't, Luka Doncic, one of the bright young superstars in the NBA, a franchise player for the Dallas Mavericks, was going to be there for his entire career, but Dallas got fed up with his conditioning and the taking care of his body aspect. And so Nico Harrison was the general manager at the time, said, all right, apparently him and Rob Pelinka had conversations, who works for the Lakers, and they made that deal happen. One of the worst trades in any sport ever. And Luka is thriving in Los Angeles. The defense isn't great, but again, that's a basketball conversation. But even still, like, it's a generational talent in exchange for an older player in Anthony Davis, a first-round pick. And again, Lamar would fetch a better package than Luka got. But the agent said, quote, Lamar being traded could be similar to the Mavericks trading Luka Doncic. The Mavericks were complaining about Luka's toughness, taking care of his body, work ethic. Luka gets moved. He loses all that weight. He gets in great shape, and he's got a new lease on life. Lamar might be the same. And the agent said, if Lamar were to be put on the block, even quietly, and you are a team that has not established a quarterback, do whatever it takes. You know what? I do think it would be like the Luka Doncic trade. And here's the reason why. Because the Ravens fan base would be like the Dallas fan base and be absolutely livid. And the Dallas fan base essentially got Nico Harrison ran out of town for that trade. Partially because Luka was a fan favorite franchise player, was supposed to be there for 20 years, and partially because the package was so bad. Now, again, I don't think the package for Lamar would be bad, but the fact that we're even having this conversation right now about potentially trading Lamar Jackson is honestly ridiculous to me. And it would feel similar to the Luka trade, where it'd be a crazy deal and everyone would be, like, shocked. And the Ravens fan base, at least the majority of it, I would think, would be furious with the move. I know not everybody. I do know there are some Ravens fans who are on board with trading Lamar Jackson. Me personally, I am not. But it is crazy that we are here. So, kind of, it's intensifying the situation here because, again, there's already all the conversations about Lamar's injury status for the game on Sunday and how much time he's missed this season, which, again, like, he hasn't really been that injured over the course of his career. He missed 2 back halves of seasons, and now he's been banged up in and out of the lineup this year. But this kind of adds, and apparently people are anticipating a very crazy Lamar Jackson offseason, which we just went through 3 years ago. I mean, I don't know, why do we have to do that again? We don't have to do that again. So hopefully everything gets worked out with Lamar Jackson. Hopefully Lamar's able to play on Sunday. We'll get into that in the final part of the show. But coming up in the second part of the show, we'll also talk about it a little bit, and especially with Lamar Jackson and that Tyler Huntley conversation. John Harbaugh shut down that convo. So stay tuned. Plenty coming up on Locked On Ravens. First, the show is brought to you by Gametime. NFL season is in full swing, and there's nothing like being at the game. The crowd noise, the energy, and cheering alongside other fans. Watching at home is great, but being in the stadium hits different. The frustrating part has always been getting tickets, waiting in queues, dealing with logins, and watching prices change right at checkout. That's why the Gametime app gives the advantage back to fans. It's the hack for unlocking amazing NFL tickets and experiences in just a few taps. The app is incredibly intuitive. Browsing, comparing, and buying tickets takes just minutes. And one of my favorite features is being able to see the view from my seat before buying. There are no surprises. And the zone deal stood out to me. You pick the section, Gametime picks the seats, and you save even more. Take the guesswork out of buying NFL tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL. That's LOCKDON NFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today and get back to being there live. Moving along on Locked On Ravens, Kevin Oestreicher is still here with you on this Wednesday, New Year's Eve edition of the show. So happy early New Year. Maybe you're watching this in 2026 already on January 1st, or maybe a day after that or two. So happy New Year, and we'll do a little reflecting in the final part of the show. So be sure you stay tuned for that. But appreciate everybody for being here and again, making Locked On Ravens a part of your day and your first listen each and every single day. We have 5 days a week plus more of daily Ravens content and coverage for you here on the show. And obviously the regular show, Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. Eastern time. This is episode 1673 consecutively for me here since taking over back in 2019. And yes, I do take credit for Lamar's first MVP season because that's when I started off doing the show. So of course the correlation there is the reason why, but we have bonus episodes on the weekend when the headlines permit. We have watch-alongs during the games, which we will have the big Week 18 showdown. We'll be watching it here on Locked On Ravens. Also, instant reaction shows after games and after pieces of breaking news. Also, the Locked On Ravens Squad show. And if you want some extra add-on content, the Everydayer Club is now being offered across all the Locked On Podcast Network and the Locked On Ravens. We have that here where you can have exclusive one-on-one text access with me to talk about the team, as well as Locked On Discord server. We're doing weekly Q&As on Fridays late night and a bunch of other great features. So if you want to check that out, be sure to do so. The link in the description down below is one option, as well as you go to the Locked On website. You can do it through the Locked On Ravens page there. One more note on the Mike Sando article about Lamar Jackson. I forgot to read this part off as we were heading into the first break. Apparently the agent that Mike Sando talked to here said that he loved Minnesota as an under-the-radar destination, and apparently the Vikings would send J.J. McCarthy to Baltimore as part of this deal, giving both quarterbacks a fresh start. Apparently, in this article, it says Jackson on artificial turf in a dome, look out. And then McCarthy with a Harbaugh worked well at Michigan, where his coach was Jim, not John. Okay. All right. No. Could you imagine this team going from Lamar Jackson to J.J. McCarthy and having that be the answer? I mean, look what happened to Minnesota this season, where they have elite skill position players like Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison's awesome, T.J. Hawkinson is there, and I know it wasn't just all on J.J., but they needed him to take a leap, and I know he was injured for a little bit, but I mean, he just didn't. That's the type of situation we're talking about here. I'd rather have Malik Willis personally, but those are the types of conversations we're having right now. And I couldn't imagine them trading Lamar Jackson for JJ McCarthy and a couple picks and, having that be the situation. I would not be on board with that. Also, the article mentions that the Baltimore Sun suggested that, Lamar would like to play for the Dolphins, which Lamar has never come out and said that. At least not to my knowledge. I haven't heard that or seen him say that. I mean, did he say it to Mike Preston? I don't know where he's getting that information from again. So that article from the Baltimore Sun, very vague and stuff kind of just thrown in there without timelines or stuff that I had seen before. So that was interesting. So again, the Lamar Jackson situation from the offseason perspective is one that everybody's going to monitor. I just hope it ends with a Lamar Jackson restructure or extension and he stays in Baltimore. But the situation that's being monitored right now is Lamar Jackson's injury situation. Obviously, he suffered the back injury in Week 16 against the Patriots right before the end of the first half. Tyler Huntley comes in, fills in great. Ravens lose that game. Then Huntley plays against the Packers, and the Ravens win that game on the back of Derrick Henry and his 36 carries for 200 plus and 4 touchdowns. Now, there have been multiple different reports, and we'll get to those a little bit more in the final part of the show about a couple of the players, not just Lamar Jackson, but a couple key players for the Ravens and the Steelers in that Week 18 game. But obviously, John Harbaugh was asked about Lamar and Tyler Huntley and kind of what that could look like, and talked about a lot of different things with how Tyler looked. And what John Harbaugh was very, very complimentary of Tyler Huntley in the way that he's improved, and he really came, to me, just my opinion, he came back a different quarterback for sure. And he's been able to go in to a couple of different organizations, learn there, and be in Baltimore for a while, understands the system, understands the team, is very familiar. And, Huntley has improved on a lot of flaws that he had. I think he's a much smarter quarterback now in terms of decision making. That's what John Harbaugh talked about. His decision making has, really improved, and he's just making smarter decisions there at the football and a couple of other things as well. But there was a question that was asked about if Lamar Jackson is kind of close to ready, but, they're not really sure. Do you push it or not push it? And the fact that you have a lot of confidence in Tyler, does that play in that? And John Harbaugh just shut it down. Just shut it down. He said, no, I think the fact that we have a lot of confidence in Tyler is a real big positive and a real plus, but it doesn't factor into whether Lamar plays. If Lamar is ready to go, he's playing. That's it for sure. There you have it. There you have it. And this is the right decision, by the way. I mean, look, I think Tyler's awesome. I think that they should give him Cooper Rush money, maybe even a little more than that this offseason to keep him around, because I think he is a very good insurance policy for Lamar Jackson. And look, I agree with what John Harbaugh says here, where all of that is, it's a plus. It's a luxury to have a quarterback like that where you can put him in games. And because the Ravens tried it with Cooper Rush and it was a disaster. It was a disaster. So to me, Tyler on this roster is important, but Tyler Huntley is not the starter. And there are two different ways you can look at it, because, again, I've seen multiple different conversations from former players. Shannon Sharp is on this train. Emmanuel Acho is on this train about, Lamar Jackson. The number Shannon Sharp threw out there was 70%. We talked about this a little bit on a show earlier in the week, where Shannon said, like, Lamar Jackson, 70%, Tyler Huntley 100%, and he was talking with Chad Johnson, and because Shannon Sharp's big take is, of course, he would start Tyler Huntley, and Chad Johnson was like, in Madden, or you're talking real life? And then he said, like, you're tripping and all that. But Shannon Sharp said, are you telling me 70% Lamar Jackson is better than 100% Huntley? And Chad Johnson said, absolutely, with an expletive in there that, we're not going to say because this is a family-friendly show. But Chad Johnson was very passionate, like, yes, absolutely, 70% Lamar is better than 100% Huntley. And I agree with that. The thing that would make it be Huntley is the better option is if Lamar is like 30%. And, like, he can't move properly, can't step into his throws, the mobility is like gone. Like, if he's struggling to move and, like, can't do anything pretty much, then yes, you don't want to play an injured Lamar like that, because that helps nobody. I'm sure Lamar would be at high risk for injury at that point. He can't do what we know Lamar Jackson can do, and that's just, it's letting the Steelers off. So yes, you want to play Huntley in that situation, because at that point, it's not helping Lamar, it's not helping the team if Lamar, like, truly, like, can't be himself. But if he's just a little banged up and the back injury has improved, and I think over the course of the season he's been more than just a little banged up. But, like, even still, if he's able to do most of what Lamar Jackson can do, maybe you eliminate, again, like, he hasn't run as much this season. Maybe you take out some of that element of his game, which he had been getting back to, but I am curious of the back injury if that's the case. If, again, it's 70%, 80%, 90%, I mean, it's Lamar all day to me. Tyler Huntley, again, he played a great game, but he played it within the confines of what the role was. And I think that you can run a similar style of offense that you ran with Tyler and Derrick Henry out there with Lamar, and, still give Derrick Henry like 25 to 30 carries in this game. And I think that I think you should do that, because, if Lamar isn't 100%, and again, no one in the season at this point is, but I'm talking like injured. If he's, 70% Lamar, you probably want to ride Derrick Henry regardless. Like, even if Lamar was healthy, you would want to, do that, because that's just the identity, and Lamar can work off of that. But I mean, Lamar just opens up so much, especially deeper down the field, where, Tyler has improved his deep ball, but, that's not the game right now for them, where we know the Ravens can take those deep shots with Lamar out there, just the gravity Lamar Jackson brings to the table. So, I mean, I appreciate John Harbaugh's answer here. And again, I'm sure it wasn't like all that crazy for him. I'm sure, like, when he was answering the question, it wasn't like all that craziness that, he said, because people took that answer and were like, hey, look, all this stuff that's being said about Tyler Huntley right now, replacing Lamar Jackson as a starter, and he's going to play week 18 regardless of Lamar's health. John Harbaugh just shut all that down. So coming up in the final part of the show, we'll talk about some updates for Lamar Jackson, Ravens and Steelers, also some other players that are questionable for this game, or their status is in question at least. So be sure to stay tuned. Plenty coming up on Locked On Ravens. Continuing on Locked On Ravens, Kevin Oestreicher still here with you on this Wednesday, New Year's Eve edition of the show. Again, appreciate everybody for being here. If you have a friend or a family member who is a big Ravens fan or wants some daily Ravens coverage, be sure to send them over here on Locked On Ravens. Just wants the Ravens perspective on something. We have them covered just like we have you covered here. And also be sure to follow me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok at ChaosStriker34 on social media. Also, New Year's resolution, I'm going to be trying to get the Facebook rolling. My focus this year was Instagram. That's taken off. On Twitter, obviously, we're nearing 50,000 followers there. But Facebook is going to be my next adventure this season. So thank you again for all the support here on the show. And just a little reflection, because I think for every new year comes new opportunities, but it's also a chance to reflect back on what's happened in the previous season and the previous year. I mean, this has been an incredible year of growth here for the show, for the channel, for myself as a host. And, none of that's possible without the support that I get here on a daily basis from you, or from everybody who tunes in, watches, listens, and, tunes in, whether you are an everyday or you listen every single day, or whether this is your first time ever hearing me or knowing who I am. Welcome in if that's the case. Or whether you tune in a couple times a week or once a month or whatever it is, like every single listen, every single watch, it means so much to me. We've added on some stuff gradually, like the watch alongs we started up this year. And it's so cool to reflect on like the communities within the communities, like the watch along community. These shows come out at 6 a.m. and they premiere on YouTube in video form. So for those who are watching in video form and they're in the premieres, like we have those communities. And so it's been incredible. Over 17,000 subscribers on YouTube. We're gunning for 20,000 here, hopefully in the next year. That's a New Year's resolution for me, is to get at least to 20,000 subscribers. Getting frisky, maybe 25. But hey, I mean, we have so many amazing people in the community, and I just want to continue to add to it each and every single day. The audio form continues to grow every single day as well. And just to look back on, where I started with this, and, starting off with no experience of any kind in, radio, TV, none of that. I was given an opportunity from the network, and they believed in me. And, here I am today. So I'm looking forward to an awesome 2026 and beyond, and looking back at 2025. I'm just so thankful again for everybody who supports me and spends part of their day with me and making me a part of your routine, which is, again, just absolutely incredible. So thank you. And happy early new year. I'm sure I'll do more reflecting tomorrow, because that's just kind of what I do sometimes. But we're here talking Ravens and Steelers. Big game. Now, there have been multiple different reports about Lamar Jackson and his availability. Ian Rappaport of NFL Network, he put out the report that the Ravens are apparently cautiously optimistic about Lamar Jackson. There have been some other reports from other prominent members that, it's maybe 50-50 or a little less than 50-50. So I think the Ravens are keeping this as close to the vest as possible. I mean, this is one of those situations where, we kind of get on the Ravens at times, and John Harbaugh at times, for keeping stuff close to the vest. And I've always understood that, and I've made that clear here on the show. But this is one of those times where I'm like, yes, don't tell us anything. Like, I'm okay with that this week, because the Steelers, I want them to prepare for both guys. I think that is a competitive, like, this is one of those times where I'm just like, yes, this is absolutely a huge competitive advantage for Baltimore. If Pittsburgh has to prepare for both, take resources and put them on both guys, with knowing only one is going to play in this one. So I think that we're probably not going to hear a lot. Obviously, practice will tell us a lot in terms of what happens today, and we'll talk about that obviously on tomorrow's show. But yeah, I think that, I genuinely don't know. And that's kind of what John Harbaugh said, to be determined. And that's what I kind of expect the tone to be, but we shall see. TJ Watt also, who suffered a freak lung injury. He had to have surgery on it. It's wait and see for him, apparently, according to Ian Rappaport. Again, there are some other reports as well about, the Steelers being optimistic. And, Mike Tomlin said that he was optimistic about TJ Watt. So also mentioned a couple of other guys who are on the injury, or I guess will be on the injury report. So Mike Tomlin on Watt said he's more optimistic than he's been in previous weeks, but also talked about Calvin Austin, who the Steelers desperately, desperately need, because I mean, there's just there's not a lot on that Pittsburgh receiving core right now. You also have Brandon Eccles, James Pierre, and Isaac Seumalo, who those guys all also are optimistic about the availability, according to Mike Tomlin there. So going to be interesting to see who actually suits up for both of these teams. We know DK Metcalf, though, will not suit up for the Steelers in this game. Obviously, why they need at least to get Calvin Austin back, because there's not a lot working there in that room. But they can use Pat Freiermuth effectively. They can use Jonnu Smith effectively. But the Ravens' run defense, as I've talked about in the early part of this week so far, has been very good recently. And in the first game, the Steelers only averaged 2 yards a carry, 17 carries for 34 yards. And so I think Jaylen Warren's talented. I think Kenneth Gainwell is talented. But it could be tough sledding against that Ravens run defense. And if it is, without DK Metcalf, who had 99 more receiving yards and the next closest receiver back in that first matchup between these two teams, I mean, that's advantage Ravens. That genuinely is. DK Metcalf gave them so many problems in that first game. And the fact that he's not out there is going to help a lot. It genuinely is. Now, they will have Derek Harmon in this game, who they did not have in the game in the first time, which, you know, he's one of the best run stuffers that they have. The reason they drafted him was to stop Derrick Henry, essentially, and he'll be in there. So the Steelers have a much more formidable defense to stop the run than the Packers, who were playing essentially backups and, you know, guys who had fallen off at that point, and the Patriots, who also were missing a couple of key guys. That availability, you know, especially if TJ Watt plays, they will have a much more formidable defensive front, but it's going to be a big test for Baltimore and that offensive line for sure. And the O-line has played really well the past 2 weeks. You know, the best 2 games of the season have come in back-to-back weeks here in week 15 or in week 16 and week 17, excuse me. So really tough test for Baltimore. You know, these Pittsburgh-Baltimore games, you always just kind of throw record out the window, throw previous games out the window. It is those 60 minutes. I'm expecting that in full force on Sunday night. That's all I have for here today, though. I'm Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. On the way out, be sure to like and subscribe button in video form, and follow along and subscribe in audio form for 5 days a week, plus more of daily Ravens coverage. Coming up tomorrow, we'll be diving into more daily Ravens content and coverage in the year 2026. So a happy new year again. I'll see you right back here soon on Locked On Ravens.